Day 8 of the Novena to St Philip, May the 24th. Philip's care for the salvation of souls. When he was a young priest, and had gathered about him a number of spiritual persons, his first wish was to go with them all to preach the gospel to the heathen of India, where St. Francis Xavier was engaged in his wonderful career, and he only gave up the idea in obedience to the holy men whom he consulted. As to bad Christians at home, such extreme desire had he for their conversion, that even when he was old, he took severe disciplines in their behalf, and wept for their sins as if they had been his own. While a layman, he converted by one sermon 30 dissolute youths. He was successful, under the grace of God, in bringing back almost an infinite number of sinners to the paths of holiness. Many at the hour of death cried out, "Blessed be the day when first I came to know Father Philip." Others, "Father Philip draws souls to him as the magnet draws iron." With a view to the fulfillment of what he considered his special mission, he gave himself up entirely to hearing confessions, exclusive of every other employment. Before sunrise, he had generally confessed a good number of penitents in his own room. He went down into the church at daybreak, and never left it till noon, except to say Mass. If no penitents came, he remained near his confessional, reading, saying office, or telling his beads. If he was at prayer, if at his meals, he at once broke off when his penitents came. He never intermitted his hearing of confessions for any illness unless the physician forbade it. For the same reason he kept his room door open, so that he was exposed to the view of everyone who passed it. He had a particular anxiety about boys and young men. He was most anxious to have them always occupied, for he knew that idleness was the parent of every evil. Sometimes he made work for them, when he could not find any. He let them make what noise they pleased about him, if in so doing he was keeping them from temptation. When a friend remonstrated with him for letting them so interfere with him, he made answer, "So long as they do not sin, they may chop wood upon my back." He was allowed by the Dominican Fathers to take out their novices for recreation. He used to delight to see them at their holiday meal. He used to say, "Eat, my sons, and do not scruple about it, for it makes me fat to watch you." And then, when dinner was over, he made them sit in a ring around him, and told them the secrets of their hearts, and gave them good advice, and exhorted them to virtue. He had a remarkable power of consoling the sick, and of delivering them from the temptations with which the devil assails them. To his zeal for the conversion of souls, Philip always joined the exercise of corporal acts of mercy. He visited the sick in the hospitals, served them in all their necessities, made their beds, swept the floor around them, and gave them their meals.
On the day before St. Philip was buried, a nun living about 16 miles outside of Rome saw him in a vision. She saw a holy old priest seated on a chair, in white vestments, shining like the sun, gazing on the Blessed Trinity. And around and below him was a great crowd of souls singing his praises. She wondered who all these souls were, and a voice told her that these are the souls of those who had been saved by means of this holy old man. The nun did not know St. Philip, although of course she had heard of him, and she did not know that he had died. She told her spiritual director about this vision. He asked her for a description of the priest, then showed her a portrait of St. Philip, and she said, "This is exactly the man that I saw in my vision." In his first World Youth Day as Pope at Cologne in 2005, Benedict XVI said the following: "Anyone who has discovered Christ must lead others to him. A great joy cannot be kept to oneself. It has to be passed on. This saying of Pope Benedict's expresses the soul of St. Philip. He has discovered Christ. He cannot keep it to himself. He must pass on his knowledge of Christ and his joy. It's commonplace to think about this in regard to St. Philip's time as a priest. His biographers often point out that it's from the very first moment of his ordination that he is seen spending his mornings in the confessional or near the confessional so that he could be seen, or sometimes out on the steps of the church if there was no one coming in, praying his breviary or his rosary, letting it be known that there is a priest available to hear their confessions, to give his counsel, to give his spiritual guidance. Soon began the meetings in his room for spiritual discussion that grew into the oratory. St. Philip was always on the lookout for souls, and he used his winning ways to draw others to himself and to draw them to Christ. But it must be remembered that St. Philip was a layman until he was nearly 36 years of age, and his care for the salvation of souls did not just suddenly begin when he was ordained a priest. His desire to lead others to Christ, to share his discovery, to share his joy, is something of his whole life, particularly evident from the time he first came to Rome. St. Philip came to Rome as a young man of about 18, after having had some kind of experience of God when he was living with his uncle at San Onofrio. He never spoke of what had happened, but he made the decision to devote himself entirely to serving God in poverty, in simplicity, but not as a priest. He took up lodgings with a family from his home country of Florence, and for his simple lodging and a little bit of food, undertook to tutor the two sons of the house, who both grew up to be men of God. St. Philip's concern for souls being evident from the start. He undertook the study of philosophy and theology, not to study for the priesthood, but because he wished to have a greater intellectual understanding of his faith, and probably, as Father Robinson argues, to understand more deeply what had happened to him. In Father Jonathan Robinson's book on St. Philip, In No Strange Land, the embodied mysticism of St. Philip Neri, he writes an important chapter entitled Studies and Books. And he says that St. Philip's life at this time was characterized by three as yet uncoordinated drives. One towards silence and solitude, prayer, another towards studies and books, finally one with at least the beginnings of a sense of an apostolic life of drawing others to Christ. St. Philip did not drop one or another of those drives, but brought them into a harmony, into a synthesis. His studies helped him to do his work of drawing others to Christ. His prayer, his studies, his apostolic work all worked together. And then, even in his years as a layman, St. Philip was drawing others to Christ. How many are the stories of his engaging young men of his own age, of his own standing, into conversation, into witty dialogue, and then inviting them to come with him to a church to pray or to serve the poor in the hospitals. Well, my friends, he would say, when shall we begin to do good, you and I? His joy that he had found in Christ, he could not keep to himself. It extends even to the conversion of hardened sinners, even when he was still a layman. It extended to the founding of a confraternity to look after the convalescent sick and poor pilgrims to Rome. And note that all this time, St. Philip was not considering becoming a priest. This he saw as a task for the layman, to draw souls to Christ. I think it's fair to say that he had rejected the idea of becoming a priest until his confessor practically ordered him to receive holy orders. He wanted to serve as a layman in the world, and he communicated to others his discovery of Christ. And that's still our task today, whether priest, religious, layperson living in the world, to bring others to Christ. In that homily at World Youth Day, which I referenced earlier, Pope Benedict XVI speaks of the transformation that takes place through Christ. Christ himself transforms violence into love, death into life. He transforms bread and wine into his body and blood. Through this, he transforms us into a sharing in his saving love, the love that conquers death. And Pope Benedict used the example of, or the image of nuclear fission, that this first transformation sets off multiple transformations, eventually leading to the transformation of the world when God will be all in all. St. Philip desired God to be all in all. In all his work for souls for 35 years as a layman and 45 years as a priest, he wanted to communicate to others the joy that he had found, the joy that he got from knowing Christ. He allowed Christ to transform him and to make him an instrument in transforming others. May he gain for us a share in his zeal for souls. Anyone who has discovered Christ must lead others to him. A great joy cannot be kept to oneself. It has to be passed on.
Philip, my holy patron, who was so careful for the souls of thy brethren, and especially of thy own people when on earth, slack not thy care for them now when thou art in heaven. Be with us who are thy children and thy clients, and with thy greater power with God, and with thy more intimate insight into our needs and our dangers, guide us along the path which leads us to God and to thee. Be to us a good Father, make our priests blameless and beyond reproach or scandal. Make our children obedient, our youth prudent and chaste, our heads of families wise and gentle, our old people cheerful and fervent, and build us up by thy powerful intercessions in faith, hope, charity, and all virtues.